hi, just before we go on. Oh, no, I can't think of anything.
Quite like that. It's very, reminded me of like an air hostess.
Bryce. Oh yeah, okay. Hi, so just before we continue with this week's podcast, I've just read an article that says all live music might be cancelled until November 2021. And considering I make my living through live music, I'm fucked, guys. Christopher, you're welcome to Fucked World.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go arm in arm.
So
Dance of death.
What we need to do is just beg for money from people that listen to podcasts. But yeah, if you want to listen to the podcast a couple of days early, and then there's lots of other things that you can get by
theoretically
a tiny little bit of cash, theoretically, then go to unsungpod.net/donate or patreon.com/unsungpod and be a fan of ours officially through money, because that's the only way to be a fan.
Before we go, I want to give a big shout out to Anthony Murdoch, because we did get one new subscriber last week, so thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
He is he is one of my best friends in the whole world, so I don't know if that
Good
counts.
That's emotional.
They all count these days.
It's like your mum on your gigs.
Right. Yeah, as long as she pays in, it doesn't matter. Thanks, bye.
So hi, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. We're still in quarantine. We're still in isolation.
And making it
still
worse.
Not in the same room.
Yeah, making it worse for ourselves by looking out the window at the sunny day outside while we do this.
No, I don't need, and we can't even have a window open because there's the sound bleeds in and you'll hear trains go by. Oh, like, just looking at, I can literally not see a cloud in the sky from where I am. All I can see is blue skies and overflowing wheelie bins.
Nature's mocking us.
It really is.
It's like when those little kids press their face against the window of a sweetie shop and they get snotters in the window and stuff. That's how I feel right now, just looking at the natural world.
I can see somebody across the road from me has their window open and they are fully sunbathing.
Bless.
In their living room. They've got their legs hanging out the window. Oh, I'm so jealous. Oh, that's sweet vitamin D.
I was going to say, yeah, delicious. Drink it up.
So how are we all, guys? Everybody okay?
I am fine-ish, well fed, learning how to cook a lot of stuff still. That's going pretty well for me and my flatmate. Catching up on some highly underrated sci-fi. I caught 2010 this week, the sequel to 2001 AD, which loads of people turn their nose up at. I'd been watching some equivalent programs to ours, I guess, about sci-fi movies, unsung sci-fi movies, and 2010 is in fact very, very good. I was really surprised at how good it was. And
well, I mean, it's a sequel to like a masterpiece of cinema. So even if it's not a masterpiece, then I guess it's going to be looked down upon.
Exactly, well, it's totally overshadowed.
But in actual fact,
but it's very, very good. It's really beautifully made, and I think if it didn't have that hanging over it, it would be very, very highly thought of. So that's my hot take and my tip.
Have you seen any interesting underrated sci-fis recently, Mark?
I started watching Tales from the Loop. It takes place in this town in America where there's like a sort of science lab underneath that kind of deals with alternate realities and all that. Not really digging it, if I'm honest. So no, not really been catching up on underrated sci-fi, although I did finish Ozark season 3, which is significantly better than the first two seasons combined. In the last couple of episodes are some of the most harrowing things I've seen on TV for a wee while. Thoroughly recommend it on the basis that you have seen the first season. I'm very much of the opinion that if a TV series doesn't grab me within the first 5 episodes, then it's failed. I don't know why I stuck with Ozark, but I did, and it's kind of paid off now, but I don't think it should have taken that long to get that good. 10 hours well spent.
Can I just ask before David chips in here, are either of you guys those people that will finish a book even if the book sucks, or are you of the mind that life is short and discard it?
I try and finish a book no matter what. I think there's maybe like 2 novels I've ever not finished.
I started questioning the psychology. I used to be the same. In fact, I was almost OCD about finishing it. It would hang over me. And then I don't know what happened. I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm really not having a good time here. And even if this does improve, will the net result be a good experience? Probably not. So I've got much more comfortable with the idea of just tossing something to the side. And I think I'm like that with series. I could see me doing what you did with Ozark years ago, Mark, but I think I'm just like, I don't need to do this. Like, why am I putting myself through this? There's loads of stuff out there that I want to see, and I'm clearly not going to have time in my life to see it all, so I might as well press on. Dave, what about you? What hooked you?
Well, funnily enough, I installed Doom 2 on my computer. Like the classic mid-90s shoot-'em-up game. It's like sort of remastered.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
So the graphics look really good, and I've just been doing that. And then last night I was bored, and I ended up just watching the movie of Doom.
That's what I was going to ask about. Yeah.
And it's really shit. It's just like everything you don't want from an action movie. It's fucking dreadful. But hey, it passed 90 minutes of my life, so that's all you can ask for right now.
That got The Rock and Carl Urban in it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's only 90 minutes long. Felt so much longer.
It truly does, I know. I don't know how they managed to make it boring, but it was really dull. So
yeah, I mean, Resident Evil got through 5 absolutely top shelf movies. Anyway, talk about hooks, guys. Hooks. You know who's a band that's got loads of hooks? ABBA.
Would that be... Well, yeah, I mean, ABBA have hooks. The modern ABBA... I mean, that's
don't
not
give
true.
Me that.
Although, right, there's a way that you could say that they're a modern ABBA in that they're big, but then they actually got bigger when they weren't releasing music, and now they're just ubiquitous, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we're talking about Daft Punk. Which is possibly the opposite of Unsung, you'd think.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you tell us a little bit about
David.
these guys, because I've never heard of them before. They're a really obscure act from France.
David, how am I going to get these files?
Yeah, I know. We're going to have to go down some dark 4chans to find these MP3s, because they could be pretty rare.
Deep web.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're a band that are basically so famous and ubiquitous that they are basically now a meme. In fact, Lemmy, the Scottish comedian, has made them a meme, where he's got a bot set up on his Twitter that says, check out Daft Punk's Get Lucky if you can, it's the sound of the summer. And it just retweets that every Friday afternoon, and it's been doing it for 5 years, and it doesn't ever lose how funny it is. So like, yeah, Daft Punk are just like culturally just there over the last 5 or 6 years. Definitely, possibly the most famous anonymous people in the world. Possible progenitors of IDM.
IDM.
The worst. EDM, sorry. Yeah, definitely wrong vowel there. Definitely not EDM. Definitely not IDM. Yeah, but I don't know, there's a few interesting things about Daft Punk, about what happened to them, and I think Homework, the album that we're going to cover today, it's kind of an album of contradictions. It's a weird album in the timeline. Well, when people think of Daft Punk, they don't think of a sort of slightly subtle electronic house record from the mid 90s. They think of like mad funky space rock with Pharrell Williams. So
you know how famous they are? They're so famous that there's a flatworm named after them called Bichelalia Daft Punka.
A flatworm?
Yeah, because it's got like a weird head that looks like one of their helmets. And whoever I don't know, would that be biologist? It was that discovered it. That's what they named it. That's how you know you've made it. If your band has a flatworm named after it.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's absolutely no doubt they're probably the most famous act that we've done in terms of mainstream youth culture, I guess, and like being able to go up to a teenager and go, do you know who this is? Then everybody knows Daft Punk, or at least knows their songs.
Yeah, I mean, the normies that may accidentally stumble across our page, our back catalogue, most of the, maybe Carly Rae Jepsen, maybe LaRue, maybe some of the piss taking of Foo Fighters. Daft Punk is probably the only other one they're going to relate to in any level.
Yeah, and in terms of like songs, Get Lucky and a couple of the other ones from their most recent work with Pharrell Williams and Nile Rodgers have been the soundtrack to adverts for the last 6 years.
Yeah, Get Lucky is the soundtrack of the summer.
Well, yeah, exactly. But what
let's get discussing who the fuck they actually are.
Well, Daft Punk are a French electronic music duo, and one of them is called Gamanuel de Homem a Cristo, and the other one is called Thomas Bangalater. No, it's Thomas. How would you say that, Chris? You've got a good French accent. Bangalater? Bangalter?
Thomas Bangalter.
Great. So, yeah, they've been together for nearly 30 years. Since 1993 they formed in Paris, and they just started off as high school pals making house music together. It was sort of an interesting time for French house music. And
wait a minute, as I understand it, they started in 92 not as a house duo but as a band called Darlin'.
Yeah, that's right.
Along with a guy called Lauren Brankowitz, who then went on to start the band Phoenix.
Yeah, who were like of that French electronic sort of early 2000s wave.
Who I mentioned later on as well. And
yeah, who also share a drummer with Cult of Luna.
Oh, really? There you go.
Yeah.
And wow, interesting. So they released, I mean, the whole name thing is pretty well known, I think, but they released a single which was reviewed in the Melody Maker, the now defunct British music magazine, and the reviewer, it was only a couple of lines review because it was a single, but it called it Daft Punky Thrash, and the band, I think, were a little bit insulted but amused. And then the two members, Guy Manuel and Thomas, went on to do this duo, kind of mocking that by calling it Daft Punk.
Funnily enough, obviously these guys that had been in a band went on to attend a rave and maybe discovered the ecstasy drug at some point.
You know, it's a rooftop rave in Paris. Apparently that was like a big thing, the top floors of buildings.
Well, yeah, it's funnily enough, in France at that time, France was going through a similar thing to the UK in terms of anti-rave legislations and anti-noise legislation, and there are some sort of comments to that musically within this record.
Yeah. Revolution 909 being the main one, I think.
Yeah, but funnily enough, they apparently they attended a rave at Euro Disney in September 1993,
which is where they met.
Great.
They met Stuart McMillan of the Slam, the Scottish kind of electronic music.
Yeah, Glasgow-based label. Well, Slam are the artists, and he's co-founder of the Soma label, and like really influential, like mid-90s record, working from places that are still there, Rub-a-Dub Records and the Sub Club, and also would have been the Arches at the time, gone but not forgotten. And they just the two guys basically handed their demo tape to Stuart at this Euro Disney rave, and he really enjoyed it, released their single The New Wave. And then a mix of which became Alive, which is on this record, and they also released a version of Da Funk,
1995, yeah.
Yeah, 1995.
So a full 2 years before this album came out.
Yeah, and it seemed that, so they were like DJing at nightclubs, getting some kudos in France, kind of, but like these demos went around for about a year and a half before they got picked up, and they were signed in September 96 by Virgin. Even then, you can kind of tell that they are very business savvy. You know, they're only sort of 20, 25 years old then, but they sign to Virgin, but they license the tracks to them rather than giving ownership to them, and they set up their own production company.
Which was really, really significant because it gave them ownership of their own master recordings, which gave them, like, I think you'd effectively call it the upper hand. Like, they had creative control. They could control things like what it got synced with, what it got used alongside, what kind of events, how they wanted to be depicted, you know, by association. That's a really savvy thing to do, and one of the reasons they were able to do that is because they recorded this particular album, Homework, in their house, so that they didn't need that huge advance that most record labels use to kind of get the rights from bands. That trade-off is that you need the advance to record the album, we'll give you the advance, we keep the rights, and then in the long run with the albums that are a success, the record label really benefits for that. So they didn't actually have to buy into that scheme, even though at the time Virgin did try and make them go in 96, go into a studio and redo a lot of it. They were like, no, we're just using the stuff that we've done, and that gave them that level of control, which got them off on definitely the right footing.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're obviously ambitious guys, although funnily enough they don't seem to necessarily be the hardest working guys, although, well, they certainly didn't appear to work that hard on this record. Yeah, that's it. They're just really clever and savvy. You know, they said that they were doing about 8 hours a week recording this record.
It sounds
they kind of saw this record. They saw this record, but like that's over like 6 months or whatever.
Yeah,
and then that they also were kind of trying things out on this record to then try things out later on. They saw this record as a sort of practice, and that's why they called it Homework. They were working from home in their bedroom, and they said that this album could have been called Lessons or Trying or something like that as well.
You know, it's interesting that you know, the album was recorded, in their words, very cheaply, very quickly, very spontaneously. And I don't think, given their origins, you know, in a kind of indie rock band, and given that this was just something they were turning their hand to, when I'm saying that it doesn't sound like a lot of time was spent in it, I'm not meaning that entirely nastily. What I'm meaning is that you don't get the impression Daft Punk thought they were going to turn into Daft Punk. You get the impression that they thought this was a fun project and they'd stumbled across something they were quite good at, but they weren't, by any means, they weren't investing their futures in this band. They were just going to do a record that they liked, that they were proud of, that didn't get them into any situations they weren't comfortable with because they were, you know, on a good deal. And yeah, I don't get the impression that it had these massive aspirations, but it did click. I mean, they said as well this album was only meant to be singles. They weren't actually trying to write an album. They were trying to write just a series of singles, and ended up with so many tunes that they were like, well, we've basically got an album, we should just put one together. And therefore there's no kind of through narrative to it, because it's just a bunch of songs basically. It's not one giant concept or anything like that. So it was sequenced differently before it came out.
Yeah, which is something that we maybe talk about in terms of house music itself, because I don't think house music has ever been a genre that is tied to or comfortable with the album as a format. House music has always been about the club, about the beat, about the 4/4. You know, it's got its origins in the early 80s in the sort of LGBT and Chicago scenes and New York scenes. Very simple synthesizers, you know, the Roland 808s and 809s and 909s.
909s, yeah.
And
it's a good moment though for you to talk. Some of the names you're mentioning, just before we skim over it, is to talk about some of the people that inspired them. Because I mean, there's a track on this. It was called Teachers, where they literally reference the names of loads of people that they were into. But there's also in interviews, just to kind of like back up what you're saying there, people like Frankie Knuckles, the Chicago house DJ. And is it Juan Atkins, the Detroit kind of techno legend. Like people like that were some of the big inspirations behind the band, or some of the big inspirations behind them doing this project, because I think it started out as a project rather than an overt band. Some other things that seemed to kind of be quite prominent were like Kraftwerk, which I think is pretty obvious, Aphex Twin, and they said in particular the Window Licker track was kind of revolutionary. You can understand that as well, because it's got that smoothness to it. It's got that, you know, and Aphex Twin plays it for laughs a wee bit, but I think it's got like a kind of like seedy kind of smarminess to it that Daft Punk, I mean, invariably became very lucrative for them as they got older with stuff like Get Lucky, and certainly with the second album especially. There was a lot of like references, because they came from like indie rock. There's a lot of references to things like Supertramp in the 70s that kind of, I don't know, again slightly kind of groovy, twangy, like especially the keys and organ tones. Quite chilled. They were big into people like John Carpenter, Vangelis, Moroder, Philip Glass, especially when they were doing their soundtracks, which I'll mention later on. They also said they listened to a lot of stuff like the Doobie Brothers and Fleetwood Mac. Kind of bluesy, vaguely funky MOR rock, really. So you can hear a lot of that, especially in the second and third records, I think.
I mean, I think there's a reason that they've become so ubiquitous in pop culture or pop music, is because they have an encyclopedic knowledge of what has come before. And they are very, very talented at picking bits. And I mean, you can hear, like, specifically, they pick samples, you know, from 70s and 80s funk and soul and disco stuff.
Can we talk a wee bit about Discovery, the second album, on that note? Just you're talking about 70s samples especially, because I think even though Discovery's quite slick, it's a bit more synth pop. It's got this whole thing with, like, there was an animated film came out after it called Interstellar 555 that the band had written, and they'd kind of produced under the direction of this, I think it was a manga director, and that formed
Leiji Matsumoto.
Yeah, and that was like formed the shorts. That was chopped up and formed the shorts of the songs, the singles that were released based around this like space bandit or kidnapped or something. But that's got a lot of 70s samples. It's got a really what would be the adjective for that? It's got a really sort of corny, but it's deliberately very, very corny.
It's like a sort of really shiny sort of. I mean, they're going for like a space opera.
I think space disco.
Yeah, space opera disco. And it's like the big use of auto-tuning and compression and stuff like that. But
everybody will know the track One More Time. That's like the perfect example of this OTT cornball space disco thing that is just so, I mean, it's really simple, and that is one thing they do, is very, very simple music, especially in Homework. But even at this point, I mean, harder, better, faster, stronger as well, as just this repeated vocal loop. And Digital Love as well. It's still a very, very simple structure to such a huge single. It's an interesting album, that, because as you're saying it, like, it's one of the ones where the influences, the sort of 70s influences and the samples are really, really worn on their sleeve. Way more so, I think, than the debut, and they start to lean into that more and more as they go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they lean into the album as a concept as well. You know, that first
on that one, definitely.
That first record was them just trying out their production skills and picking and choosing, sort of house music stuff that they liked and samples that they liked. This second record, I think it's stunned a lot of people when it came out, because people were just expecting a dance music record, and then it was this mad, crazy space disco. And it was very well done. Even as a metalhead at the time, in the early 2000s, Daft Punk were a band that appealed cross-genre to people. I remember learning the tapping guitar riff to Aerodynamic because it was in Total Guitar. And that was like 2002 when I was pretty much just listening to Pantera. Daft Punk were introducing me to the riffs of Nile Rodgers and 70s funk and stuff like that when I would never have heard it otherwise.
So I think obviously something that we can't get away from is that between Homework and Discovery, they adopted the masks and the helmets. Yeah. It was initially was masks in photo shoots because they didn't want to be the focal point of the photo shoots, allegedly. And I mean, it's worked, because there is no denying that, with some exceptions, I'm sure, for superfans, like Daft Punk could walk down a street. They could be playing the Hydro, they could be playing Murrayfield, and they could still walk down the street and go and get their shopping. and then nobody. Yeah,
that's absolutely it. Mark was saying that earlier. They've not specifically not released their faces, but they've managed to hide their faces very well.
Since the early days, they did start playing live. I remember when they first came out, and I remember it was them. And I was kind of confused when Daft Punk became like the droid sort of thing, because I did remember seeing them in some of the early press, but yeah, and it was incremental. At first it wasn't planned. They would arrange an interview and then they'd go into a shop and just buy masks or buy like cling film and stuff and just put it over their face to make the photos weird and to make them less a part of it. But then ironically, I think you see that portrayed in a lot of places as them trying to remove the image of the musicians from the music and make it about the music. But then I think that kind of went full circle, because they got so far away from their faces when the masks initially start. I mean, their first masks that they used were €65,000 a piece. That's like they were like scrolling LED controllable masks that they could sequence and play using a glove in their hand and stuff. It was not cheap stuff, and so the masks eventually ended up being a huge part, maybe even the biggest part of their music and their whole aesthetic. So, well, it certainly added to a sort of air of mystery, and specifically during that Discovery time was like this sort of sci-fi vibe that they had going. They put a huge amount of effort into their live show as well, and their visuals, which they're sporadic live shows though. It's easy to put that much effort in when you're not doing it every night. Yeah, that's true. What was after Discovery? Because I've got Human After All was 2005. Was there anything in between? Nah, not really. They did Daft Club was like a remix record that was released after Discovery. But yeah, it had some interesting remixes. But then, Human After All came out in 2005. Mark, are you familiar with any of the stuff before Human is After All, like the Homework? Or because I'm just kind of curious, coming for your musical background, what were you hearing? Everyone's heard the singles, man. I think I don't think there's any single person that's listening to this podcast that has not heard a Daft Punk song at some point and has not heard One More Time. Did you have that reaction that Dave had though, which was, Dave was quite, despite being a big Pantera fan, was kind of warming to it, whereas I fucking hated them. I really fucking couldn't stand them. So what I've come to realise over the past, I guess, 6 months or so is that one of the things that I find most appealing about the craft of songwriting is melody, catchiness and repetition. They do all of those things, but it just becomes a wallpaper to me. Like, I think all their songs are probably 2 minutes too long, given the amount of repetition they have in there. So it was one of those things where I can understand why people like it so much, but it always struck me as being music for people who didn't really like music too much, if that makes sense. Interesting. I think it's when Human After All came out, I think that's relevant because I kind of have a softer spot for this album. yet it's the album that sort of commercially didn't land.
Yeah, it's the one that didn't have any huge singles. I mean, Robot Rock and Technologic kind of were big indie disco hits.
Buy it, use it, break it, fix it, trash it, change it, mail, upgrade it, chart it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work it, quick erase it, write it, cut it, paste it, save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, surf it, scroll it, pose it, click it, cross it, crack it, switch, update it, name it.
Yeah, Technologic is fucking horrible, but Robot Rock's actually not the worst. It's just like an electronic back-end track. It's interestingly produced. It's some cool tones.
Yeah, I remember I used to play that a lot at the student union.
This was when the indie rock part of them coming back through again, because even there's guitars in Discovery obviously, but they're done in that 70s way where they're almost not guitars, they mainly sound like synths, whereas they definitely had guitars on this one, and it was a bit truer to their roots, but it didn't really seem to connect as well. It's a really, really simplistic record as well. It's closer to the debut in that sense, and it's all stripped away. The structures of the songs are very simple. It was only about 6 weeks writing and recording. In fact, I read some even dafter statistic that there was some like 10 actual days of studio time involved in it, which is nothing for such a big band. And it got very mixed reviews. There's recognisable songs, but they were nothing on the scale of some of those other ones. I also think that there's some tracks on it, for example the song Emotion, the last track in that album, is so insultingly basic. Like, it's basic to the point of just not even being like infuriating.
Yeah, it's not an album that ever got under my skin, really. I was not a huge fan of Discovery either. I found it overly sort of glossy. There were a couple I liked Aerodynamic, and there's a couple of other songs that I liked on it, but like Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger I couldn't deal with. One More Time was just annoyed the fuck out of me.
That's so bad. So bad. That's one of their main offenders. But
then at the same time as like Human After All came out, and it was a slight disappointment, like critically and in terms of fans, and also didn't even like sell as many as expected. That was when they started really punting effort into their live shows. Just at occasional festivals they would go and do it, and I actually saw them in 2007 at Rock Ness Festival up in Inverness.
I was actually at that one. I didn't go and see them.
Oh really? Did you go see Manic Street Preachers?
No, I think I saw, was it Flaming Lips and Biffy Clyro or something like that.
Can I just add a little bit of trivia here? Do you know that like Human After All was like released, it was leaked on the internet like months before it came out, and fans thought it was a fake.
Really?
Yeah.
That was when 10,000 Days came out by Tool. A lot of people were like, "Oh, they've released this dummy album before they released the real album, because the new album's not going to be this repetitive and boring, is it?" Oh, well, if only we knew. But yeah, so like Daft Punk headlined it, but they appeared in a tent rather than on the main stage, because that far up the north of Scotland in the middle of June basically meant it never got dark, and they needed dark for their light shows, so they actually played in a tent, and it was like so stowed out. They lifted up all the sides and everything, but that's gone down as a legendary sort of Scottish festival appearance, was Daft Punk at Rock Ness. And I think that's kind of what they did for like a year or two, was they built up their sort of live legend, appearing at Coachella, appearing at Rock Ness, appearing at a few rare shows, and then let everybody talk about how legendary that show had been. And then they didn't really do much. They
can we just take a second to muse on how crazy it is that of all the, like, Coachella, yeah, that's one thing, but to pick Rock Ness
well, yeah, but like
what a landing that was for them.
Well, no, but funnily enough, like Rock Ness was like total hitting it out the park. Like for 3 or 4 years that had such a good lineup. I've seen DJ Shadow, Aphex Twin, Daft Punk, Chemical Brothers, The Prodigy, all in a field near Inverness. And then
Yeah, but it went bust.
well, it got bought over by one of the big companies, and then they just kept booking Kasabian and Example. So like they stopped actually booking interest in dance music and just went down the shit indie. And then it took 2 years for it to go bust because it was just another shit indie festival.
Yeah, so funnily enough, this was you're talking about, you know, standout one-off performances, which became their sort of trademark at this point.
Yeah.
They did that huge show at the Grammys with Kanye in 2008, early 2008. That's a pretty visually striking bit of stuff, isn't it?
Definitely, because they were using these mad customizable controllers and
Jazz Mutant Lemur controllers. They're crazy, those things.
yeah.
The suits as well, though, like the whole stage dressing and that is amazing. It's got like that neon red piping and the suits and stuff. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that was kind of, along with Coachella, that was the appearance that really introduced them to the US audience. And then obviously Kanye had that reworked version of Stronger. And yeah, they just sort of started getting a bigger and bigger US audience. And then in, what was it, 2009, they did the soundtrack to Tron Legacy.
2010, I think that was.
Oh, was it? 2010,
yeah.
A film which got very lukewarm reaction, but I think the soundtrack was considered one of the biggest successes of the film itself.
Yeah, it's okay, I guess.
2 discs. Wasn't messing about.
Yeah, 24 tracks. And then they also had a remix record as well. And I think even a second remix record. So, like, they milked that one for all they're worth. In the meantime, they'd also provided a bunch of mixes for DJ Hero.
Remember that?
The electronic version of Guitar Hero. Which, something that we've never talked about, but it's a really interesting pathway into finding music for a lot of people.
I think a lot of bands have actually had a bit of a break on the back of Guitar Hero. That band, Silver Sun Pickups, and like hardly anybody knew who they were until that song Lazy Eye was featured on it.
Dragon Force as well. They got huge off the back of their impossible to play riff.
Oh yeah, that's right. They were built for Guitar Hero.
Hard level. It's in 2010 as well. They did a surprise show or a surprise appearance at Madison Square Gardens with that band Phoenix that we spoke about. The original member, Laurent Brankowitz. He was in that band Phoenix, and they came on with Phoenix for an encore together where they played, I think it was like a medley of like Harder, Faster and Around the World, and then segued into 1901, track by Phoenix themselves. So they'd obviously still stayed in pretty good terms. But yeah, they were very much less is more, like building up a mystique around themselves, the masks, set dressing.
Yeah, and over the next couple of years, they didn't even like really play live, but their legend was building. You know, like Mixmag put them in at number 2 in greatest dance acts of all time. DJ Magazine
behind the Prodigy.
Yeah, behind the Prodigy. Top 100 DJs by DJ magazines, things like that. So like they'd been introduced to the US.
But at this point, they still hadn't had like a US or a UK number 1.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting.
Yeah. So they were like the biggest sort of alternative electronic act. They were still not mainstream, but everybody kind of knew of them. They still hadn't sold a huge amount of records. And then 2013
rolled along with Random Access Memories.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
That was
it.
Yeah.
She's up all night to the sun. I'm up all night to get some. She's up all night for good fun. I'm up all night to get lucky. We're up all night to the sun. We're up all night to get some.
Obviously everybody knows Get Lucky, which came out before the album itself. That was their first UK number 1. It stayed in there for 4 weeks. Apparently it's the most streamed song ever on Spotify.
Yeah. Yep.
And that album was, I mean, it was first of all like aesthetically a tribute to some of those cheesy 70s influences that we mentioned. On it they worked with like Giorgio Moroder, Chic, Nile Rodgers, people that we've kind of referenced earlier on in the episode. But yeah, everyone was just kind of dialed up a wee bit more, and the production was a bit slicker, and the whole delivery of the whole product was slicker.
Slide, lose yourself to dance. Lose yourself to dance. Lose yourself to dance.
suits were like simplified. They got rid of the scrolling LED bars and all that stuff. By this point, it was just these it was like black leather jackets they wore with like very fixed visor, black glass suits. By the way, we didn't actually mention they had a cameo in Tron Legacy, the film. There's a bit where they're in a control booth and you can see them in white suits. But yeah, the image had evolved, and it was all just becoming like very, very... It was kind of an allure to it. You know, they got rid of the kind of more gimmicky thing of like the scrolling LED, as I say, and the colours. It was monochrome and darker and a bit sexier in a weird way, even though it's obviously robot masks. By the way, don't you wonder?
You're into whatever you're into, mate.
Don't you wonder if maybe they were pulling a bit of a MF Doom? The helmets. Yeah. Do you think there was ever a part of them was like, let's nurture this so that we just don't have to go and do these stupid appearances? We can just send somebody out that's got a similar body type in a mask, and we can just avoid going there.
The old Andrew WK.
Well, that's because he died and was replaced, a bit like Paul McCartney.
Yeah, exactly.
And in 2013 they also co-produced that album Yeezus by Kanye, and that's kind of a bit of a yardstick of their passage into the mainest of mainstream, you know, working with the biggest. I think the track Black Skinhead in fact used drums that were originally from the Random Access Memories sessions. Yeah. So they were a huge part of at least 3, maybe 4 of the tracks that were on that Kanye album.
That's the record that Kanye West ripped off Death Grips for.
Yeah, so. I mean, he's always ripping somebody off, isn't he? That's what what Kanye is. He's an avatar for stolen goods. And then, I mean, since then, they've been pretty much the biggest electronic pop thing in the world.
Yeah, since then, they've done like huge tracks, Starboy with The Weeknd.
Let a nigga Brad Pitt, legend of the fall, took the year like a bandit. Bought mama a crib and a brand new.
That song Starboy, by the way, that was their first ever US #1 in September 2016. That's crazy to think that Daft Punk, as big as they are, didn't have a #1 until the Weeknd, whoever the fuck that is.
Well, that's it. That's like kind of why I wanted to talk about them, is because they seem so ubiquitous and they've been around forever, and you know, you think about them now, they are so huge. But it has been an interesting progression for them from bedroom house record to becoming, sort of memes of themselves, and by far the biggest electronic act in the world.
We should turn to Homework, but can we contextualise this a wee bit as well, right? So Homework was 1997, which seems like forever ago. Forever ago. January the 20th, I believe. Just a little bit of trivia to give you an idea. That was the week before the first ever episode of Brass Eye aired.
Oh yeah,
which is mad. It came out on the birthday of David Lynch and Gary Barlow, and I think we can agree, most importantly of all, Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, big Jeff! Here he goes,
man. Aye.
What a day for the world that was.
What happened to him?
I know, if he went quiet.
But yeah, so the culture at the time, though, Dave, you're best placed to inform us, but this is when you had that big explosion of Big Beat and Chemical Brothers and all these kind of acts.
So we've done dance music before, in that we did Orbital not that long ago, which is like an interesting counterpoint. And then also another counterpoint is maybe our Rusty record from 2010. And like, whereas Orbital were sort of leaders in the 80s rave scene in the UK, and they used albums to showcase their sort of more experimental and bombastic tendencies, Homework was like more of a post-rave album. It was club music, it was house music. You know, the beat was key, it was 4-to-the-floor electro. I guess people are still on Eckies, but they're in little clubs rather than big fields. And it's funny, you know, like you look at electronic records that came out in 1997, and you've got Fat the Land by The Prodigy, you've got Dig Your Own Hole by Chemical Brothers, which are that huge big beat sound that, you know, the Orbital were part of, the whole UK rave scene went on to. Then you've also got, what other records came out? Homogenic by Bjork, there's Spiritualized came out. So on the other part of that, you had the more IDM side, you know, Aphex Twin,
EDM.
Electronic. I keep getting it mixed up. No, that was IDM, Intelligent Dance Music.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So like electronic music was like growing in different various ways. You had your big beat stuff, and then you had your sort of more esoteric stuff. But then Daft Punk didn't fit into any of that really, or this record didn't, and it was just much more aligned to historic house music than it was to big beat or to rave or anything.
Can we segue just very quickly before we drift too far away from it? And you dropped a couple of names there, right? We dropped Kanye, we dropped Aphex Twin, we dropped Rusty. And what is the one thing that we recently found out those three people all have in common? some form of underlying brain damage. Kanye, I think, and he's like Make America Great Again hats as well documented. Aphex Twin just had to start deleting tweets because he was tweeting about how the coronavirus was an excuse for a police state to seize us, and he just went completely off the edge. And I think that was really surprising about Aphex Twin in particular, because his association with Chris Morris. I think we always assume he's got this really nuanced, insightful, woke understanding of the world, and here he was just spouting this conspiracy shit, and even
he's just sounding like an old anarchist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the guy drinking cider in the corner at an Oi Polloi show, and then even further down that Rusty. I mean, God. I don't know what happened to Rusty. Someone dropped him in water or something like that. But oh my God, he had to delete his whole Facebook account.
Yeah. So I mean, he had like a mental health breakdown and like a physical health breakdown about 3 or 4 years ago, and he's been very quiet on social media since. But he chose the last couple of weeks to come back and say hello. And first, Rusty is back, and he had a new profile photo, and then he said, "Human beings are not a disease." And then he basically had some anti-vax stuff, and oh my God, it went too deep. He
went extreme. Yeah, he went full on like InfoWars stuff with something. It was really, coronavirus was a way to purge humanity and all this kind of mad shit. And then he just had to delete it all. So yeah, it turns out that drugs are bad for you kids.
Well, yeah, who ever knew that? So yeah, like, so mid-90s we're talking about all these bands, and then this record comes out of the French scene, which you had other guys like Cassius, Mr. Wazo. Stardust, they did that song Music Sounds Better With You, which also featured one of the guys from Daft Punk.
Oh my goodness,
fucking great tune, by the way. This was the sort of French house movement of the late 70s, which was late 70s, late 90s, which like took stuff from Chicago house and obscure sort of funk records, but really sort of pared down the production using old school analog synthesizers. And like this small French Paris scene, in particular Homework, then went on to be hugely influential. First in the 2000s with like indie disco stuff, bands like Justice and Simian Mobile Disco just wouldn't exist without Daft Punk, I don't think. And then, you know, God help us all, the EDM US explosion and fucking Skrillex and everything that came after that.
I mean, it's interesting as well that Happy Bag had called this the best house album of all time, and I think there's no denying that from an influence perspective, it's just enormous in terms of like people realising that they didn't have to have that sort of Orbital-esque lifetime invested in electronic music to do this as well, because one of the things that I think makes Daft Punk particularly interesting from their arrangement and writing perspective is that this was indie rock kids who only a few years prior had their minds blown, and they then decided to follow that. They weren't OG, you know, they weren't these guys that had been steeped in this and the technology since a young age, and that maybe infuriated a lot of people in the scene. I'm sure there was a fair bit of snobbery around that as well. They could just decide that they were going to do this kind of music, and suddenly it was so well received. But it's probably because there was an artistic perspective that was brought to it by not being overly immersed in it that enabled them, for example, to completely strip it back to almost a sort of band arrangement with maybe only 2 or 3 elements at times. And given the repercussions of this album, that lack of grounding in electronic music prior to them doing the Homework album probably had a huge impact on the entire, as you say, the entire ecosphere of electronic dance music for 2-3 decades to come after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Almost.
I mean, And I suppose like tied with the fact that technology was becoming cheaper, you're able to buy synths a bit cheaper, but you're also able to like home record and home produce on the computer a little bit more. This is like the beginning of, you know, being able to buy what would have been like Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever back in the day, and just be able to sort of teach yourself rather than be from that rave background where you had to like buy, you know, thousands of pounds of synths and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's also interesting that a friend of ours who does electronic music, when asked about his opinions on Daft Punk, said that he still can't decide whether they're completely genius or the worst thing to ever happen to electronic music.
Well, that's exactly it. It's like they're somehow magpies for like finding so many parts of pop music and dance music and house music and bringing it together. And you've seen how they go hugely bombastic with it in albums after this, but for this, I think is hugely influential on house music.
It's interesting though, one of the reflections I saw on Daft Punk, and especially on this record, a lot of people have tried to do that. A lot of people have tried to kind of rebottle the lightning since then, thinking, oh, the formula's so simple, I can do it. Now, one of the disadvantages is that everything's moved to digital now, and Daft Punk at this point, because they were on that crossroads of technology, they actually use a lot of analog sounds and sort of big playful analog sounds in their music. It's some of it's quite silly, some of it's quite cacophonous almost, so that the filter work, and it's filter work that can't necessarily be reproduced if you're working totally digitally, certainly not if you're constructing your Lego on one of the DJ softwares or, you know, and that kind of thing. And so the humanity of the record, the naivety of the record, and the sort of organic sound of some of the tones is lacking from all the imitators. I think what I was reading in terms of like actual DJ aficionados, electronic music aficionados, speaking about it, they were saying there's so many people have tried to do this and can't, and it's because they're trying to do it in a time and place where they don't have that sweet spot of crossover, and
that's exactly
it lacks that special je ne sais quoi, since they're a French band, I guess.
Actually, the reason I think this is their best record is because of that quality. It feels really played and analog and warm and organic. And we all go into it obviously through the record, but I just wanted to echo that point by saying, yeah, man, like that's totally why I like this record compared to all the other ones.
Yeah.
Do you want to take us a wee tour through the record itself? Because there's quite a lot of it. Let's be honest.
So you've ended up with like 16 tracks, and there's like a few sort of like short skitty songs as well. It's not you can tell that they didn't make an album from start to finish, but like it's the little gems, as I've said, that they're sort of magpies. It's little gems of riffs or, you know, techie bits or melodies or little analog sounds and bleeps that stand out and make you go, oh, you know, that's really what I like. So when you start with Daft and Direct, and it's a little sort of nice wee funky introduction. And then WDPK 83.7 FM, which adds a sort of nice... I mean, I suppose one thing is you run the risk of not having much personality if you're anonymous, but they do kind of, you know, much like on that Queens of the Stone Age record, Songs for the Deaf, they've got this little radio idea.
Music. WDPK 83.7, the sound of tomorrow, the music of today, brings you exclusively Daft Punk's homework.
But I guess the first track proper is Revolution 909 that we kind of hinted at earlier on, which is a sort of reference to the Roland 909 drum machine that underpinned so much of the music prior to this album, that was such a feature in all the electronic music of the decade before.
And actually, this was the fifth and final single from it, and it had a video directed by Roman Coppola, the son of
Francis Ford.
Francis.
I was hoping you were going to say Polanski.
But yeah, so this is like got that little opening skit, which is a reflection of that mid-90s anti-rave party thing.
Policies passed by the French police forces, to clamp down on it.
And it's a good track, man. I really like this song.
Well, they don't hang about after that because they go straight into Daft Punk.
Daft Punk was that the first thing you heard by them?
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously it was because of that Spike Jonze video, and I mean they landed on their feet with Michael Gondry and Spike Jonze at their peak sort of cult popularity. That bizarre video, that the fourth wall break as well of the music being on the Ghetto Blaster as opposed to just being overlaid onto the video itself. Yeah, it was like that video. Even though this wasn't, in comparison to later material, a huge selling thing, it was a huge point for them. And they already knew it was a standout tune because of the release on Soma that got them so much plaudits. But this reworking of it, it's that kind of blend as well of chic, that sort of 70s thing, and 90s electronica was really well judged on that track. Yeah,
and there's like a big sort of like G-funk vibe to it. And this is like them getting so many influences from... But then it's so simple as well. So this was the track that everybody was playing, in the 2 years before the album was released, and it was the Chemical Brothers actually that had incorporated it into their live shows, and a lot of people started to pay attention to it then. I remember when it came out, and I just thought it was fucking amazing. And to this day, I love this song. You can kind of play it anywhere, anytime, and people will just go, "Oh yeah, I'm into that." It's a good one to drop at any club, basically.
Yeah, it got to number 7 in the charts, this one. And they reckon it's their hip-hop song, which I can kind of hear a little bit. It's kind of got the same sort of, almost the same kind of breakbeat thing that a lot of hip-hop use. But yeah, it was when the big funk lead comes in. I quite like funk anyway, so that's a nice little mashup of different genres and 90s, which is quite cool.
Then you've got Phoenix. Which I wonder could be named after their pals in Phoenix, or it might just be named after a cool word. I don't know.
I believe this came out at the start of that year, and then Phoenix, the band, started in 97 later that year, I think.
I mean, it's just a word, I guess. So,
I mean, the band may well have taken it from the song. So
yeah, that's true.
Idea. It's pretty fucking generic, this song, though.
Quite dated as well.
Yeah, this one, it doesn't sound as fresh as it did. It's got some nice bass line in it, but...
Fresh, you say?
Well, then it goes on to Fresh, which in actual fact is a great track.
I like the guitar. Is that a guitar sample in it, maybe? I don't know if it's a sampler actually played, but the guitar bit's pretty cool, I guess.
It's this track actually nods, I think, to Discovery. Like, you can hear a bit more of that guitar-y, slick disco thing in the vocoder. It's a wee bit trippy. It's got that kind of wave sound. I mean, it's better. It's certainly a lot better than Phoenix. No denying that.
And then Around the World is the one that like really points forward.
Yeah, Stylus magazine said there would be no Daft Punk if there wasn't Around the World. It just would never have clicked the way it clicked if that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
The fucking phrase is repeated 144 times in this fucking song.
Isn't it interesting that, like, quite often the most popular song on an album is our least favourite?
This is not my least favourite on the album. There's many tracks that I hate way more than this.
Oh, yeah.
What's the guy for LCD Sound System? Like, he did a wee bit of an interview on this song because, like, obviously they've got that song Daft Punk is Pointing at My House.
Yeah.
He's born as well.
He was saying that, like, he hates this song, but that's also why he loves it, because it's just so simple and it's like so annoying.
Around the world, around the world, around the world, around the world.
Yeah.
For me, they fall on the other side of annoying.
Yeah, I know. This track annoys me, and it's like...
It became like a total trademark for the band, though. The vocoder thing is, I mean, even, again, my mum and dad would know that one. Mikael Gondry did the video for this, and the video for this song is absolutely key to its success, a bit like the video for Daft Punk. It's the first appearance of helmets and, you know, the kind of space helmet visor helmet thing, and I think that kind of informed their idea for the suits, because it was after this that they started wearing that. It's also got like a really acidy vibe to it, this song, which I think sets it apart from a couple of the other ones. But no, I mean, I hate it, but it's not the worst.
I hate it.
Can I a special mention to the next one, Rolling and Scratching, track 8.
Yeah.
I mean, that track really sets the tone for the act Justice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like the total precursor to that. The simplicity and the harshness of it. Very, very simple song.
I really like that. Like, that's the more sort of like techno-y acidy side of it that I really love. I remember when I got this. I remember. Yeah, I think you said it last week when you did a thing where you only kept a certain amount of tracks from an album.
Yeah.
And this was like one of the 6 that I kept, just because I really like the sound of it. I love the harsher end of the spectrum on this album.
It's really different as well from the rest of the record, isn't it? It's a lot darker after that big single. It kind of makes sense, I suppose, to have something which is a bit more. You know, it sounds like that, like the kind of synth stabby thing that they do quite a lot, which evolves throughout the song. It sounds like a broken modem to me, and I found it really, really irritating.
Oh, see, I'm into that.
Teachers, track 9, all their heroes.
Yeah,
and
kind of
influences
skitty.
that we mentioned. Yeah. Has a disco sample by Karen Young from 1978, and that was a single, or had been a single. Seems an odd one to have been a single. I don't know if it was in the exact same form.
It's weird. Not sure about
that. Yeah. Track 10, High Fidelity.
Yep.
Tedious Eurohouse music is all I've got.
I like it. I like it.
It's kind of almost trip hop. When I say trip hop, it's almost DJ Shadow-esque in places.
Yeah, a little bit.
But I think the vocal sample's quite cool. Like, one of the things I like about it is they kind of chop up the vocal sample to make it sound like a hook, even though it's not actual words. I think that's relatively clever, particularly in that era. Must have been a pain in the ass to do for them, especially in their bedroom, not having access to high-end gear and all that, and computers that they could do that kind of shit in the late 90s. But I like it in that sense. But yeah, it just kind of passes me by a little bit.
I think Rock and Roll, the track 11 after that's one of the best on it. There's some really nice sort of filtering work in the synth. Really, really simple again, like a concept track. I do think the percussion on it is extremely uninspired. The actual pattern's fine, but the tones are so flat. I definitely don't think that's aged well as well. And you can tell that they were just new to this from that, because I think there's very few occasions where they would put a sort of unfiltered percussive track out like that again. It's too static.
Yeah.
But it's an idea track really, and it's got some really interesting noises on it, and it's a bit harsher, so it gets points for that.
It feels really played as well. It actually feels organic, which is one of the reasons I like it.
That's the analog side of the album, definitely. Yeah. Oh yeah, track 12.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can
Totally
just fuck
pointless.
off. What's the point?
It's a total fuck around. I get like track 13, Burning, is them kind of similar tricks that they were doing in what's it called, rock and roll, but kind of fucking about with the LFO via the pitch on the synth. Drops in that kind of 70s bass tone. The drums are pretty meh. I think that song really overstays its welcome as well. After that LFO idea starts to wear thin, about 2.5 minutes, they just repeat the same shit and it's just like,
yeah, I mean, I suppose what they're doing is like, because they're not thinking about this as an album, and they're doing it as, you know, club tracks. Club tracks quite often are, you know, 6, 7, 8 minutes long because you've got to mix in and out of them. And for a lot of these songs, this album would be a perfect 40-minute record, I think. Get rid of the skits and then cut down a bunch of those longer club tracks. Just make album edits of them. But they obviously weren't into doing that. But I mean, I like Burning. It's got a good Chicago housey sort of type vibe to it. I think the Burning, Indo Silver Club, and Alive 3 tracks in a row are great, to be honest. Like, I think it finishes on a high.
It's interesting that all 3 tracks sort of go in a different electronic direction. So Indo Silver Club starts as like electro, really.
Yeah.
It's much more electro. It's got some interesting use of gates in that tune, and there's some, again, like this really woozy LFO in one of the sequencer. But I really feel the song goes nowhere. Like, it starts very promising, actually, like possibly the most interesting, and then it just runs out of ideas. And again, I think it feels like the first album of a band trying to figure out where they want to go with their sound, what works for them. Alive, I think, is probably the best song on it. It's the tranciest song on it. But I think it also sounds quite dated. It at least proves they could play a bit harder, that there was a little bit of an edge to them when they wanted to let it out. Unfortunately, I feel that edge is the very thing that they then started to shave off. Like, the consecutive records throughout their career became more and more safe, or not safe, but like, you know, mild. And then it finishes with, what's it? How do you say it? Funk AD. Daft Punk backwards, which is just a pointless loop on an album that's already about 30 minutes too long. So why? It's interesting to be forced to disassemble it though, right? Because Daft Punk are, as you say, that ubiquitous thing, that entity that just exists, and you, as a passing listener, very passing listener, as in like running away, I've never had to engage with a full Daft Punk album, and so it's interesting to kind of take a bit of a deeper dive. You can hear, especially in this album, indie musicians turning their hand to something else. You can actually hear the sensibilities are different from the likes of Orbital and people like that, but it works at moments. Like we've kind of highlighted a couple of them. I think it's a horribly long record, just so stretched. Even if I was going to give it some time and appreciate some parts of it, any parts that I enjoy go on so long that I end up hating them. I can side with Mark in the sense that it's their warmest record, it's their most human, it's most played, it's the most interesting, debatably, because of that and because of the backstory and where they came from and all that kind of stuff. It is definitely a huge influence on music, but it's also a huge influence on many of the worst aspects of modern pop music. As a result, I hear a lot of them coming through it, so no matter what merits it might have had when it came out and how sincere, I do like the guys' approach, however sincere they were about this project at the start, and it doesn't sound like it was something they were planning on turning into a multi-million euro venture, but it's tainted by everything that came after it, inescapably tainted, and I don't think it's that amazing to begin with. So if I had 3 thumbs, I would giving it 3 thumbs down.
Mark?
It's a hard pass from me.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm like Chris, like I actually appreciated getting into it and listening to Daft Punk this past week. It's actually been a pretty interesting experience. I found things about their music that I liked, but I don't think they ever bring it together enough in a song for me to actually go, that's a good tune, or even that's a good band. I liked this record the most out of all the ones they've done, just because of the flaws in it and because it feels played. But you're totally right, man, Chris. It's fucking far too long, man. And they clearly learn from that as well, because Discovery is all the songs, like not a single song. Only one song is like over 7 minutes, right? And the longest, aside from that, which is the last song's 10 minutes, the longest aside from that is 5 minutes 44. Clearly they learned for their next record what worked and what didn't work. But by that point, they're clearly looking in a different direction as well as musicians and what they want to achieve.
Yeah, by that point, it's their career.
Yeah, totally. So for me, this is probably their best album. Does it need to be on discography? No. We have covered better electronic music records, I think. I think we will continue to discover, or I will continue to discover via Weaver, better electronic records.
Yeah, I mean, Orbital's way better than this. Way better.
See, I just think it's a really interesting sort of point in house music, because I think what Daft Punk are very good at doing is finding bits of genres and other people's music and then distilling it, and they've done that to huge commercial success of their last 3 records. But what they did on their first record was they did it really well with a sort of underground dance music. I don't think anybody should ever listen to this album non-stop unless it's out in a club. You know, maybe you could probably listen to this non-stop if you took an Eckie, but like, they never meant for this record to be listened to throughout. What it is, it's really interesting bits of dance music, and it's got some really cool bits on it, and you can pick and choose. And like, I think you should use this as homework if you want to get into house music. You know, listen to this record, find the bits that you like, find out what bits influenced that, and if you want to start DJing, then pick a couple of tracks from this and drop it in, and 23 years later they'll still go down a bomb in the sub club. Considering how incredibly successful they've become and ubiquitous, this record is really influential for people buying records and playing in dark week clubs and putting on club nights, rather than people going to Coachella and doing shit drugs that they became. Anyway,
I think
so.
Unfortunately for me, man, as soon as you say this is one of the most important records in the history of house, it's kind of like, you know, picking the best dressed for the Third Reich. I just
Well, I mean, I fucking love house music and dance music, and there's a huge amount of brilliant house music out there, but as a genre, it's never really been an album thing. So like, this is like a really good starting point album to then go and find playlists, and to go and find singles, and to go and find 7-inch records or 12-inch dance versions of all these house music classics that have been going, you know, since the 80s. And so what I might do is I might make a little playlist for everybody with this in the middle.
Oh, please. I would hate for this to be over so soon. I'll do
a house music year by year history. How about that? Just for you, Chris.
You do that.
Sounds special.
Okay, anyway.
What I did manage to do a pretty decent Nexus, although not very long, which is not really my style.
I mean, it's got a lot of detail, but it's not got a lot of jumps on it.
This is the first time we're seeing Nexus tonight. Will it be the last? What do they have in store for us? Not good.
Why am I here?
You're in the Nexus.
This is the Nexus.
For you, this is what you wanted.
Well, so we had to get from Daft Punk to
Oscar Pistorius.
And who chose that?
Davy Bright.
And thanks to Davy Bright for choosing Oscar Pistorius. So after sort of 2008, 2010, Daft Punk started going absolutely fucking mental. Coca-Cola distributed their own limited edition bottles called Daft Coke.
I didn't know this.
They did photos with Courtney Love for the music project of Yves Saint Laurent, the fashion house. And then in 2013, they made a rare public appearance, still wearing their masks, at the Monaco Grand Prix on behalf of the Lotus F1 team, and there was like specially branded Daft Punk cars.
Bet it wasn't them.
So
I bet that's when the doppelgangers were involved. Those kind of like public think, yeah, there's no way that was them.
Anyway, so Lotus in Formula One. So they used to be, apparently it was the I don't know, my friend Ben is really big into F1, but it was always the Renault team, I think. They've got Renault engines and then designed by Lotus. I don't know how it works. But anyway, at some point they were owned by Tony Fernandez, who actually may still own them since 2010. And Tony Fernandez is a Malaysian entrepreneur. He's also the majority shareholder of Queen's Park Rangers Football Club. And yeah, he's pumped millions and millions of pounds into Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, and they've gone down and down the league table. Tony Fernandez also happened to be the boss on the Asian Apprentice. It was called The Apprentice Asia, and Tony Fernandez was the guy that said you're fired.
The Donald Trump.
The British version was Lord Sugar, and the American version obviously was Mr. Donald Trump. On Donald Trump's The Apprentice, I think season 7, I don't know. The seventh season of The Celebrity Apprentice was won by Piers Morgan.
Fuck off.
So, Jesus, Piers Morgan, what are you doing? So, Piers Morgan, and funnily enough, in the last week or so, I've found myself agreeing with Piers Morgan. Yeah. So, times are truly
What's
odd.
that all about?
Piers Morgan is actually calling out the Conservative policy and stuff
David,
like that.
A stop clock is still right twice a day.
Well, exactly, and a stopped cunt.
he's been right about guns, and he's right about that. That's his two. Yeah,
there we are. Anyway, Piers Morgan, funnily enough, he had this brief stint he took over the Larry King Live show in the US in 2011.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which was weird because he wasn't really a big US name or anything, and somehow got this huge late night slot. It lasted a couple of seasons and 3 years, dropped lots of viewers. But anyway, at one point, Oscar Pistorius was to go on and do a chat with Piers Morgan, but it didn't actually happen because Oscar Pistorius injured himself in a boat accident.
Okay,
so there you go.
Mark, do you want to go or will I?
I'll go. I did mine backwards, so I've just had to reorder it. So this could go.
Classic. You haven't done that for a while.
Quite horribly. So in 2013, Daft Punk released an album called Random Access Memories, as we've spoken about, which was preceded by the mega hit Get Lucky. In 2014 and 2018, respectively, both Pharrell Williams and Nile Rodgers appeared on The X Factor, the former as a performer and the latter as a guest judge. The X Factor is, of course, produced by Psycho Entertainment, which is the entertainment company of Simon Cowell. One of the things that his entertainment department have done is many of these productions for, obviously his quote-unquote stars, but they also had a foray into investigative journalism. Did a show called The Investigator. The Investigator was a two-season TV series, which was fronted by a guy called Mark Williams Thomas, who was a former police officer, who then later became a lecturer at Birmingham City University and is also an investigative journalist. On The Investigator, the TV series, they looked at the unsolved murder of somebody called Carol Packham in Dorset. And the case was then picked up again by the Dorset police because it had been closed, and they used his evidence to kind of do some further investigation into it. If his name sounds familiar, it could be because he won awards for a documentary that he made called The Other Side of Jimmy Savile.
Aye.
Yeah.
Here we go.
That was basically the first expose about Savile's crimes, which came out a year after he died, and that's ultimately what led to the Met Police launching the probe into his crimes, which is obviously Operation U-Tree. In 2016, he also did a documentary called Oscar Pistorius, The Interview, which is where he interviewed Oscar Pistorius when he was still on house arrest, but just before he was sentenced, and it was the last time Oscar Pistorius was on TV.
Notice we've not actually given context. Oscar Pistorius is the guy who had neither of his lower legs and he ran on blades, but then also he shot his wife.
Shot her. She was in the toilet and he woke up apparently really scared one night, or so goes the story, and shot her 3 times through the door of her bathroom.
Yeah, but people were sceptical. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, cool. My Daft Punk Nexus. Daft Punk, as I said, were originally in an indie band called Darlin, with an apostrophe at the end. And Darlin were named Darlin after a Beach Boys song of the same name from 1967. In season 6, episode 14 of the TV show Home Improvement, the Beach Boys made a cameo appearance because, according to the storyline, they were actually cousins of the next door neighbour Wilson, who
classic,
kept himself hidden behind the fence. Obviously Brian Wilson and brother Wilson, whoever he was. But yeah, so Wilson was meant to be their cousin, and also Wilson was meant to be miffed because the Beach Boys hadn't used his songs. And actually, other than the very, very last ever episode of Home Improvement, when Wilson showed his face, that was the only episode where you saw Wilson's face momentarily, because he was meant to be standing behind one of the Beach Boys. I think it was Brian, and Brian moved because Brian can't take directions because he's mental, and you just momentarily saw Wilson's face. That was the only other time. Anyway, in season 1, episode 14 of that same show, titled For Whom the Belch Tolls, there you go, Tim Allen, jackpot, Wilson, bizarrely, for a show of that nature, quotes the book 1 Corinthians, verse 11, which is a kind of quite famous phrase. When I was a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Now that quote's famous for a number of reasons. Barack Obama said it in his inauguration speech, I believe. The musician Todd Rundgren quoted it, and probably the most famous of all, it was in the movie Child's Play 3, a proper classic. But yeah, very, very famous saying from 1 Corinthians, and another saying from, there's a few in 1 Corinthians actually, but another saying from the same book, verse 9, is the quote, "So I do not run aimlessly, nor do I box as though beating the air, but I punish my body and enslave it, so that after proclaiming to others, I myself should not be disqualified." And that was the tattoo on Oscar Pistorius' back.
Fantastic.
And it's also incredibly ironic that it finishes "so that I myself should not be disqualified," given that he was then disqualified from the 2008 Paralympics because the Blades gave him an unfair advantage. So yeah, there you go, biblical links.
That was good, thanks Chris.
You're welcome. Now we get something pretty special for next week. Something a wee bit different. We're enjoying having guests on, especially non-cis white male guests. We are inviting on long-time listener and frequent online haranguer Vicky Henry. We are going to do an episode of her choosing, which is the album Is This Desire by PJ Harvey. Now, PJ Harvey is an act that we've been swithering about doing for ages because I'm a big fan. I believe the guys aren't overly familiar, but I know that Vicky's very enthusiastic on the subject, so I suspect it could get quite heated because PJ Harvey has a lot of potential underrated albums, unsung albums, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of opinions flying about and hot takes and maybe some broad Scottish swear words.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
It will be animated.
Chris has underplayed that ever so slightly. We started planning this podcast back in October 2017, and we've been talking. He's been talking about PJ Harvey since then.
So, yeah, every week. Oh, maybe I'll do it next week, or maybe do it next week.
It's because it's so much homework.
Right, what we go next is to who's got the pot? Who's got the box?
You can hear it. I've got it. Okay.
Yep.
And we will be connecting PJ Harvey to. It's my choice.
Oh,
the Pepperami guy.
Of course, it's a bit of an animal.
Exactly.
Great.
You can't do this one, Weaver, because you're a vegan.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Has Pepperami not come up with a vegan option yet? That's crazy. Yeah, there you go. So join us next week when we bizarrely try and connect the Pepperami guy to PJ Harvey.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks very much. I'll make a playlist of house music for you, Chris.
Dave, please don't keep me hanging. Don't keep me hanging. All right.
Great. Go to Facebook and vote for if you want. Yeah. Done. Thanks a lot, guys.
if you want, whatever, suit yourself.
I know I've just been slightly distracted by some news. Donald Trump names Vince McMahon as advisor to restart the US economy.
That is, I mean, we're through the looking glass. I mean, Linda McMahon's been on he's on one of his boards for ages now, but yeah, that's the height of absurdity.
Yeah,
WWE was declared an essential service.
Do you think maybe somebody's in Ron DeSantis' pocket or vice versa? Chris, if you don't take a second to, after Weaver says that, to like put a small pause in and then play No Chance, like his entrance music, you've missed a fucking trick, man.
I'll just replace Marvin as the outro music today then. See you later, guys.
Bye.
Alright, guys. Right, cheerio. Bye.